This is the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast, brought to you by Art Wiederman, CPA with Eide Bailey. Whether it's taxes and investing or planning wisely, Art is the expert to make your dental practice profitable. At Eide Bailey, what inspires you inspires us. We provide a suite of accounting and advisory services dedicated to the total care of your practice. Visit our website to access our tools and resources tailored for dentists, eidebailey.com/dentist. That's eidebailly.com/dentist. This podcast is distributed with the understanding that Art Wiederman, CPA, and Eide Bailey, LLP are not rendering legal, accounting, or other professional advice. Listeners should consult with their business advisors before acting on any of the information or opinions shared. If you have questions and or feedback, make sure to email Art over at awiederman@eidebailey.com. That's AWIEDERMAN@EIDEBAILLY.com. You can also give Art a call at 657-279-3243. Without further delay, here's your host, Dental CPA Art Wiederman.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Dental Finance and Management with Art Wiederman, CPA. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Art Wiederman. I am a director in the dental division of Eide Bailey. We joined Eide Bailey in the summer of 2020. Very, very glad that I did. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes of our podcast, you're going to meet some of my friends, not only in the dental profession, but some of my brand new friends that I've made here at Eide Bailey. And you're going to meet two of them today. And we're going to basically... And this podcast you want to listen to. There may be some other podcasts that I've done. It's like, Art, really? I've heard this 77,000 times. It's good information, but I don't know. This one you haven't heard, and this one you want to listen to from beginning to end, because I am going to save you money from the IRS. We are going to drive the federal deficit higher than it's ever been, folks. That's what we're going to do here. And what we're talking about today is we're talking about something called the Research and Development Income Tax Credit. And this is a tax credit. It's been in the law for many years. But recently there were some changes in the law that made it very, very attractive and available to be used by dentists. And my two guests today are my team members from Eide Bailey, Joe Stoddard and Heidi Lanin, and I'm going to bring them on in a minute. And they're going to tell you everything you want to know about the Research and Development Credit and how you can take advantage possibly of this credit. And if you're eligible for this credit, which many dentists are, some are not, but many are, it's going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars in federal and possibly state taxes. So we'll get to Joe and Heidi in a moment. Let me give you some information. If you want to get a hold of me in my office in, used to be Tustin, but I'm working out of my home in South Orange County, California, in Laguna Beach. My number is 657-279-3243. We've spoken to hundreds of folks all over the country, and keep them coming. Keep the calls coming. We want to help you get through the pandemic and get back to profitability. If you have any questions or anything for me personally, send me an email at artwiederman@gmail.com. Go to our partner, Decisions in Dentistry. We partnered with Decisions in Dentistry about a year ago. The best clinical magazine in the dental profession, hands down. Fantastic content, great articles, updates, great continuing education courses that they offer. They're very, very, they're going to help you get to where you want to be. And that's www.decisionsindentistry.com. Click the box and we'll get you a complimentary 30-minute consultation with a dental CPA and our 80 CPA group. Go on to our website, which is www.eidebailey, that's EIDEBAILLY.com. And we have a whole section on dental. All the podcasts are there if you want to listen to them, as they are on the Decisions website. And if you're looking for a dental-specific CPA anywhere in the country, www.adcpa.org. We are the Southern California member of this fantastic organization, 24 CPA firms that represent about almost 10,000 dentists now. So today we're talking about the research and development tax credit. And this is a credit that you would take on your personal income tax return. You could actually take it on a partnership return. It can flow through to your personal. You can take it on an S corporation return. And this is a tax credit. And let me just explain before I bring Heidi and Joe on the difference between a tax credit and a tax deduction. We all like tax deductions. We want to write off 180% of our car. That's a tax deduction. And if I write off I get a $10,000 write-off for my car, maybe I get a $3,000 tax savings. In this credit we're going to talk about today, it's a dollar for dollar tax savings. Now, there are some adjustments that have to be made, which we'll get into. But if I get a $10,000 credit, I save $10,000 in taxes. So this is something that is very appropriate for all of you. And the purpose of this podcast is to let you know how it works. So Heidi and Joe, welcome to the Art of Dental Finance and Management.
Hello there.
Hi there.
How you doing, guys?
Good.
Good. So first thing I want to do is introduce you to the audience and let you know, again, Heidi is a senior manager with Eide, and Joe is a partner, and they both work in the research and development group. You guys have what, 20, I think you told me 26 or 27 people that work with you?
Yep, that's right. We've got about 27 folks spread throughout the country that are dedicated to working with R&D tax credits. Okay,
well, and we're doing a bunch of work with dentists, but let's first find out a little bit about you. So, guys, tell us a little bit about your journey and where you came from in your career and what you've done, and any other things you'd like us to know.
Yeah, on my end, I started my career as an R&D tax credit specialist, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years. So I started with a large national firm for the first 14 years, and I came over to Eide about 6 years ago. I'm the partner in charge of our group, so I oversee that group of folks that work in this area.
Okay, so you've been with Eide for six years, and you oversee everybody. Okay, Heidi, how about you?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a senior manager. I'm based here in Phoenix, and I'm actually an alumnus of Arizona State University. Go Devils!
Go Devils!
I'm an attorney, and I started out in tax compliance with a large firm, and then got interested in R&D, and I've been doing it for about 9 years now.
Okay, Now you're not going to get mad at me, Heidi, if I tell you that I'm an SC fan, and I came to Sun Devil Stadium with my best friend about 10 years ago. And we watched as SC was rated number 1 and Arizona went ahead 20-0 at halftime. And the natives were really, really yelling and screaming at us in our SC hats. And I was sitting next to a lady, a very, very nice lady, probably in her 50s or 60s. And she was looking at us, and we were right near the SC band, and they play the song a lot. So she says, "Excuse me, are you from USC?" And I'm wearing an SC hat and SC shirt. I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Can I ask you a question? Do they ever stop playing that expletive deletive song?" And I said, "Nah, pretty much not." So have you been to an SC Arizona State game?
Oh, yes. We have season tickets.
Oh, all right. I'm coming to Phoenix. Although right now it's about 180 degrees where you are.
Right, exactly. Maybe 190.
Okay. Well, all right. So we will still be friends, Heidi, even though you are with another team, and we're not going to have any football this season, which is very sad, but that's the way it goes. Yeah. Anyway, but we are going to save people money on tax credits. So let's start off, guys. Let's start off with a 35,000-foot view of the R&D tax credit, kind of how it works, just kind of in layman's terms. What is it and how does it work?
Sure. And you did a great job of explaining the difference between a credit and a deduction. And that's really something we want to be clear about, is that the credit really is a great incentive that you can take on your tax return. It's dollar for dollar. It's been around for a while. Congress introduced it in 1981 and just for a couple of years. And then through the years and time, it's been extended again and again. And finally, in 2015, it was made permanent. So now we can definitely count on it that it's going to be there. The federal credit can be applied to tax owed. Any unused portion can actually be carried forward for 20 years. And
20
then,
years. Wow, that's great.
yes. And then also, if they don't have tax liability necessarily, if they qualify, there's a few parameters and things that we'd have to look at. They could possibly use it for payroll tax, the employer's portion of payroll tax. So
Ooh.
it's something to think about as well. So, and also states offer their own credits. Sometimes those can be a little bit higher than federal. So something to
Yeah.
keep in mind.
Yeah, and a couple of things. Now, wasn't it a couple of years ago that it's no longer limited by the alternative minimum tax? Is that kind of what kind of opened this thing up?
Yeah, that certainly was part of the law in 2015 that opened it up, the payroll usage, and then also the AMT issue.
Yeah, so we've talked about the AMT. The AMT, guys, was it came into the law in 1969, and it was for 151 people that made over $1 million a year and paid no taxes. And they basically said, well, we're not going to let you take all these oil and gas deductions and all this stuff. And the AMT, we're not going to get into the history of the AMT, but the AMT limited the ability for our doctors to take this. And once they opened this up, we started looking at this thing, and now it's available. And I know we did a joint case because, again, once I found out that you guys had R&D credits, that you did this, my eyes opened up, because we have one of my biggest clients, obviously we won't mention any names, does a lot of this work. And the California credit, we have a lot of listeners in California, guys. The California credit was actually bigger than the federal credit.
Yeah, many times it can be.
Wow, it's really, really great. So, okay, so now we can also go back based on the statute of limitations, right? And go file amended returns. How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. Typically, it's best to get these tax credits on an original tax return, on the original filing. But if you haven't been claiming the credit, you can certainly amend that. And the statute is typically 3 years. So if the first time we're working with the dentist to claim the credit, we would look at the current year and then potentially go back to those 3 prior years as well and amend. It certainly doesn't make sense in every scenario to amend. Are there enough dollars to make the hassle and cost of amending worth it? The other thing that we kind of go into on the whether to amend or not to amend is, hey, when we do amend it, the IRS gets more involved in an amended return, right? A human gets involved in processing that. So the question is, do you really, there's a potential, I don't know if I call it a red flag, but the IRS potentially can ask more questions, that sort of thing. So the dentists we've worked with have kind of just been weighing that business decision of, hey, do I go back and grab those dollars from the prior years, or do we let those, let sleeping dogs lie in the past and just do this prospectively? But we've certainly seen different dentists, either choose to do it prospectively or, again, go back and amend. So that option's there.
Yeah, and it's like any other tax credit or deduction, folks. Is there's risk in taking a tax deduction for a continuing education trip. But, it's the law is there, and we're going to talk here in a second about what research and development is, but it's, they made the law, they made it pretty broad. So you can go back. I mean, I did with this case that we did, it was a big one. I think we ended up, Heidi, with like close to $400,000 over 4 years in credits, something like that, federal and state.
That's right.
Yeah, it was. And when I told the owners of the business, they were very, very happy. So what I ended up having to do was, the federal statute of limitations is 3 years from the due date of the tax return, including extensions. So it was a partnership, and I needed to get that done by March the 15th. And I think I got it in around the 10th of March. And then we have the California, by the way, for you folks, the California statute of limitations is 4 years, not 3. So you got an extra year for that. And so we're literally within a couple of days of getting that one in, but it was some big numbers. So let's get into the conversation of, okay, what does research and development mean? I understand it's a pretty broad definition. What does that mean?
Yeah, a lot of people, they hear the term research and development or R&D, and in their mind, there's the pharmaceutical companies of the world and the high tech, and certainly those types of companies are claiming R&D credits, but it is much broader than that. A lot of companies we work with, we work with companies in all different industries, and there is a lot of technology, software development, Engineering firms are claiming the credit, but a lot of just kind of what I might call low tech, manufacturing companies are claiming the credit as well. So the types of companies that can claim the credit is fairly broad, and the definition we have a generic definition of R&D. And one of the things the IRS looks at when we claim the credit and the rules that are outlined in the tax code kind of talk about this concept of, and Art told me to stay out of the tax weeds, so I won't use very much jargon here.
You can get into the first cut of rough. I'm a golfer, so
but there's this concept of a business component, and you can claim the R&D credit if you're developing either a new business component or improving an existing business component. So what can that be? That can be a product, a process, a technique, a formula, an invention. So if any company, it doesn't have to be, the Lockheed Martins of the world, or doing space research, that sort of thing. It can be much broader than that. But are you developing a new product? Are you improving an existing process? Are you looking at a different technique, a different type of material? Those are the kinds of things that can potentially qualify at a high level.
So I want to touch on, because we're going to get into the dental world here in a second, technique and material. So a dentist basically learns a new way to do a full mouth reconstruction, or to do a crown prep, or is using a new and improved type of material. Even they don't have to develop that material; they could just be using a new material, which is different. Is that the way it works, Joe?
Yeah, that's certainly one way to look at it. The other kind of angle that we're taking with a lot of these dentists is this whole concept of a product, right? To the extent a dentist is involved with designing, and depending on the equipment you have in-house, building a crown. A crown could be considered a product, and that crown is going to be a little different for each of your patients, right? So designing a unique product, and I'm using product in quotes, right? But
right.
That type of development and design can be very similar to what a machine shop might be doing for a part they're making for a particular component. So I guess the similarities in terms of both on the technique side, but also on the product side, is kind of where we draw some parallels that can certainly kind of fit the mold.
Okay, so I'm going to stop here because I want to give this information out a couple of times during the podcast. So I want to let everybody know, and I've let everybody know in the last several podcasts that we've recorded, that we have, I helped a little bit, but Joe and Heidi and their team have created a questionnaire for the dental profession. And so if you're listening, wherever you are in the country, whether you're a client of Eide Bailey's or not, you can go ahead and go onto our website. And so I will put this in the show notes, but I'm going to mention the website. I want you to go to www.eidebailey, that's spelled EIDEBAILLY.com//dental RD. So that's www.eidebailey.com/dental RD. And what you will get is you'll end up on a web page, and you will be able to fill out, as I understand it, Joe and Heidi, probably a 10-minute at the most questionnaire asking you some questions about your practice. And then you'll automatically be able to, as I understand it, Mr. Wiederman is technologically impaired, is what we call it. That's why I had children to help me with this. So I have been led to believe by the powers that be at Eide Bailey that you will be able to fill this out, push a button that says send, and it will go right to Joe and Heidi. Even if it comes in at like 2:30 in the morning, you're going to get up and read it and make sure, right?
Absolutely. I'll have an alarm that'll
you'll have the alarm. It'll go off every single time. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, if you want to do that, please do that. Please go ahead and go onto the website, and we will take a look and see, and we'll be real honest with you. We'll talk with you and see if we can help you here. So, and I'll mention this a couple more times. It'll be in the show notes. So we talked about research and development. So let's get into let's get into the weeds, not the tax weeds, but the dental weeds. So we know that dentists do crowns and bridges and inlays and onlays and composite restorations and all these things. So who does this credit apply to, Joe and Heidi? Is it we have general dentists, we have specialists. Who would be the best? Who's going to have the best shot of qualifying for this credit?
Yeah, great question. Really, it can be either a specialist or more of a general dentist. One thing we look at is just the complexity of the procedures you're working on. So if you look at maybe a purely pediatric practice that's doing a whole lot of cleanings, a whole lot of fillings, maybe some sealants, that sort of thing, probably not a lot of those procedures are going to rise to the level of R&D under the tax code. But we've talked to several general practices that do a whole lot of crowns, a whole lot of bridges. And again, I kind of talked earlier about in terms of designing, there's some complexities in that. There's one of the, again, I'm going to use some tax terms here, but there has to be some design uncertainty and some experimentation as you're designing a crown, for example. And the way that the tax regulations define experimentation is, do you have a process set up to evaluate one or more alternatives? So if you're in your practice looking at the design of a particular crown, considering several ways to do that, maybe you have an in-house milling machine, run it through that as a prototype, or and do some modifications, maybe some additional grinding. You kind of go through that experimentation and design process. That's the kind of thing that can meet the definition of R&D. But again, I would say the more routine stuff, where there isn't really any design uncertainty, where you're not really making a product like we talked about earlier, those are the ones we typically stay away from.
So if I got a dentist out there and they're listening to this and they're going, okay, well, I'm not really sure. But yeah, I play with different things and I design some crowns differently. Should they be like maybe taking some notes? Let's say they're doing they're trying something new. They went to a CE course. And that's another thing, folks, is you go to a CE course, you go to COIS, you go to SPEAR, you go to Pankey. These are the national continuing education providers that there are many, but these are some of the premier ones. And you learned a new technique for restorations, and you're trying it out. I mean, that would be a great opportunity, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, that would certainly be on the list of things to consider for this credit, for sure.
Yeah, so if you've taken CE courses in the last 1 to 2 years and you've tried to do some things. Now, what if I've got a dentist who's they've been doing it for a while, but well, maybe that leads us into the next question as to what kind of costs are included. So from the way I understand this credit, it's based on the amount of time a dentist spends and the team and the research and development. So what's the driver of this credit as far as the costs and in this?
Yeah, sure. Wages really are the primary driver. What we do is when we start talking to you about the types of things that you're doing, determining if they're qualified or not, we want to get a sense of how much time you are spending on these activities. And we're able to develop a formula where we can see, okay, how much time are you spending on qualified activities? How much time do you spend in your practice in general? And we come up with a percentage of time. And that percentage is applied to taxable wages. And that's how we come up with the cost that can be claimed as part of the credit.
Okay, so Heidi, so I have and again, we can go back to the one we just did, is that particular practice has about, I think, close to 30 employees. So the dental practice would have to identify, I mean, let's talk about the team players. You've got the doctor, the front office administrator who's billing insurance, making appointments, doing financial arrangements. They're not really involved in this, are they, or are they?
So when we're looking at what we call direct support roles for R&D, we're looking really at, like, do they have in-house lab technicians?
Right.
Do they have maybe some chair sides or some hygienists who are helping them in that design, solution, identifying alternatives kind of process? Those are the types of things. So if someone's participating in more of administrative duties, that is not really part of the technical process of R&D.
So it's probably going to be a dental assistant, and a doctor, I would think maybe to some extent a hygienist, possibly, a dental associate, a treatment coordinator who's involved in some of the planning of some of the cases and things like that. So for example, Heidi, let's say I have a doctor who's doing, $2 million a year in revenues. The team costs usually run somewhere around 30%. So they have like $600,000. So you're going to look at all of this, right? So we paid $600,000 in taxable wages. You're going to look at this and you're going to go through an analysis, and you might say, okay, 150,000 of this, based on my analysis and discussion with the doctor, is could qualify. So, something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. Really interviewing the dentist, figuring out what they're doing and who's doing what. Yeah, exactly.
So the wages are going to come in, and it's a percentage of the time that each provider in the practice spends in what is deemed to be the R&D activity. So what other costs can we look at here?
Sure. So there's a couple of others. One of the ones that we see often in this industry is supplies. If you are doing some sort of new product or process or technique, if there's anything tangible that you're using, any sort of, if you're looking at alternative materials, if you're using them as a quote unquote prototype or something of that nature, they're being used up in the process. Those supplies could possibly be qualified, as well as if you're hiring someone like a third party who's doing testing, something that an employee would be doing for you, except they're not your employee, they're a contractor. So those are the big top ones that we also look at.
Okay. So let's go back to 35,000 feet. How do we compute this credit? How does it work?
Yeah, one important concept in terms of how the credit's computed is it's an incremental credit. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, you can't just look at a single year in a vacuum. So if we're going to compute a credit for 2020, the tax code requires that we do a base amount computation and compare the current year spend to that base amount. And again, I won't bore you with all the tax details and the mechanics of how that works, but if we're going to look at the credit for 2020, even if we don't go back and amend, like we talked about earlier, we still need to go back and determine what that base amount is. Typically, that involves looking at least at the 3 prior years. So the first time you claim the credit, I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit of a hassle, right? You got to look at multiple years together. You've got to go back and put on your thinking cap to remember what you did 4 years ago, that sort of thing. Luckily, dentists have good records of the procedures they did and everything, so we don't have to, come up with things out of thin air, but it's still a little bit of a digging through records and wage data and that sort of thing. And then we'll gather the costs that Heidi was talking about, the wage costs and any supplies that we can potentially include. At the end of the day, again, kind of cutting through all the mechanics of the calculation, the actual credit amount is typically, for the federal, is usually between 6 and 8 cents on the dollar. So if we did this for a dentist, identified a couple $100,000 of costs, the actual tax credit, you still get your deductions, right? We're not taking those away, but your credit on top of your deductions would be typically about $15,000, what we find if we have a couple $100,000 of costs. And then again, if you're in a state that offers a state credit, we would layer that on as well. And most of the states have similar incremental credit calculations that I kind of talked through a minute ago.
So I could end up, if I had, let's just say I could find $300,000 in costs, and that would be between dental team members. We get to include the payroll taxes in that too, right?
It's just taxable wages. So
just the wages. Okay. Yep. And then lab supplies and other costs that we might be able to include in here. So that's $18,000 for a federal credit, and that could be the same for a state credit. Is your experience that the state credits? I know California seems to be higher, and you even get on top of that if you're an S corporation, you get a credit at the S corporation level, and you get a credit at the personal level, which is really, really cool. But you could be looking for, if I could find $300,000 of costs, we could be looking at $25,000, $30,000 a year, maybe.
Yeah, that's certainly a scenario we've seen, and the state credits do vary pretty widely. California happens to have one of the more beneficial credits. My home state of Utah, similar, very beneficial credit. Arizona, we're all representing the states that have some of the most beneficial credits on the podcast today. Some other states like we do a lot of work in Idaho, for example. There's a state credit. It's usually about half of what the federal credit is. So again, it's just gonna vary state by state.
But
The other
it's
thing I
still
wanted,
going to save money. I mean,
yeah,
it's a lot. So, and if you go back and you amend 2 or 3 years, you could be looking at 40, 50, 60,000. And again, let's be clear, Joe, because you and I talked about this beforehand. This is not for every dentist. So we want to be really clear about that, like you say, if you have a very bread and butter practice, maybe I don't think a pedo practice would probably be pediatric dental handles children, would have a lot, unless there's some innovation that you can show us. But a prosthodontist who's doing all kinds of complex care and treatment and things like that, they might be a better candidate, right?
exactly. And just like with everything, there's a cost benefit here. Almost every dentist that we've talked to has some level of R&D activities. It's just a matter of, we don't want to stress too much how difficult this is, because we can make it fairly easy, but still you're going to have some effort to gather some data for us. We don't work for free, so we're going to want to get paid. And if we do a whole bunch of work and there's only, $30,000 of cost, it's just not going to be enough. I mean, the cost of your time and our time to go and get that credit is not going to be there. So that's why we have the questionnaire that we talked about earlier, so we can tell and hopefully in a very short amount of time of, hey, is there something here to go after, or is it just not going to? Is the fact pattern not going to be favorable?
Okay, so both you guys, if a dentist just wants to call you and say, hey, I want to talk about this, what would be the best way to get a hold of the two of you?
So we have the landing page talked about earlier, Art, and,
Right.
and really there's a couple ways, but certainly starting with that questionnaire that we've developed is going to give us the information we need to do that initial kind of feasibility. Certainly they could contact us directly as well. There's no problem with that. So my email address is JJ, so 2 J's, Stoddard, STODDARD @eidebailey.com.
And Heidi, what's your email address?
Yes, it's HLAN as in November, IN @eidebailey.com.
Okay. And again, one more time, www.eidebailey.com/dentalRD. That's where you can find the questionnaire, fill it out. It'll automatically push the send button. It'll go to Joe and Heidi's team and they'll get back to you. So, all right, let's get into the process. How does this work? What do you do? What are the steps to do an R&D study?
Yeah, so again, the questionnaire, we'll keep talking about the questionnaire because we think it's a really good way to figure out if this is feasible without spending a lot of time on your end or our end. Let's say that we do the questionnaire and you do a lot of crowns and more complex cases, and it's going to be enough to go after. From there, we do what we call it's a phased approach. So phase one is we'll gather some additional information, some of your payroll data, some of the other costs Heidi talked about. We'll have an initial probably 60-minute discussion to understand a little bit more about your back pattern and your practice. At the end of phase one, we'll have a very good idea of the amount of credit. And it won't be an exact fileable number, but it'll be a good estimate of how much federal and state credit. And then phase two is once we know how much credit there is, the work that's going to be required to go and get the credit. Phase two is the detailed work to finalize all the numbers and then do the substantiation piece, right? And put together a report. The reason we do this phased approach is, if it's a fairly modest amount of credit, the amount of time and effort on the substantiation piece can be fairly modest, right? If it's a great big credit, you're going to want to have more documentation, more substantiation, more work goes into it. So we do this phased approach just to make sure the whole cost benefit is in line, and we don't, instead of diving in head first, you kind of wade into the process.
Okay. So again, best way is just go fill out the questionnaire. Now, quickly, I want to touch on IRS. So you mentioned earlier that they tend to scrutinize this kind of thing. And you said it might raise a red flag. But again, obviously, if a reputable firm like Eide Bailly is doing this calculation, you've got work papers to back all of this up. I mean, it's not. I mean, this is a very legitimate tax credit that's taken all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. This credit's been around for a long time. It's tried and true. However, I mean, again, on the other side of this, it's a credit, right? The IRS, when you have a credit like this, and it's especially if it's a substantial amount of savings, that they're going to want to dig in. We kind of alluded to this earlier. There were some reasons that dentists weren't claiming the credit, 10, 15 years ago. A lot of it had to do with the AMT limitation. There's been some other things that Congress has done or Treasury to loosen up some of the regulations around this. So one unfortunate thing is, since really dentists started getting heavily into the R&D credit a few years ago, we just don't have that case law, right? We don't have a court case that says, hey, and most dental practices are fairly small. There's not enough dollars to go litigate, right? So it's very unlikely we would get a court case that would lay out the facts. So it's certainly a gray area. There's a lot of subjectivity kind of built into the definition of qualified research. So I guess my point here is, because of that subjectivity, because a reasonable person could look at a certain type of activity or procedure and argue that, hey, that meets the definition or does not meet the definition, there's that potential if you're audited. So again, we don't want to sugarcoat this and just say, hey, it's all going to be good and a guaranteed result, that type of thing. There's a little bit of gray in the law, and therefore, if this is audited, certain auditors would be a little bit more aggressive in trying to disallow it. So we just like to be very upfront. And to Art's point, the reason we do the study, we do the documentation, is so that you're ready for that scrutiny if it does come. But we just want to be very upfront that the IRS may push back.
And with that said, guys, here's the deal: they are the ones that made this credit, the code and the regulations liberal, right? I mean, if they would have put in specific things that you have to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, that would be one thing, but they didn't. The law is, maybe by intent, maybe by design, is I'm not going to say ambiguous, but it gives a lot of latitude. They made the law, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Congress makes the law, and there's the old saying, right? What Congress giveth, the IRS taketh away, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
there's definitely some of that going on here. But to your point, Art, the regulations come from the Treasury Department, right? The same folks that the IRS works for, and obviously the states, have different attitudes around these sorts of things as well. So you're right. There is a lot of wiggle room with the law, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. People always ask me, what type of documentation do we have to keep for this? And I always kind of jokingly say, well, this is both the good news and the bad news, but there's no specific documentation requirement. Kind of like you were saying, Art, there's no roadmap to say, hey, you must keep this type of record in this format in order to claim the credit. That's good news, because you're given reasonable flexibility to use the records you have to document and calculate the credit. It's bad news because you don't have that guide, right? And we've certainly run into auditors that want to see records in a certain way and can be very difficult to deal with, and that's certainly not the case every time. But there's some potential, right, for having to kind of fight that fight down the road.
Yeah, I want to get through a couple more points because, as usual, this time flies by. So let's go through some of your questions on this questionnaire. I mean, maybe talk about specialists like oral surgeons, periodontists who place implants, do specialty work. What are some of these questions that the doctor should be thinking about when they're getting ready to maybe fill out the questionnaire?
Yeah, and there's some general questions about your practice, right? Just type of entity, annual revenue for the practice, how many folks do you have on staff, what the general wages, and what we're trying to kind of gauge there is there enough volume of wages you're paying, enough volume of procedures you're doing. Again, some of those specialist areas can certainly help drive some of the potential for benefit. We also want to we don't have to have an exact number, but just your procedure counts, right? How many crowns do you do in a typical year, for example? So we have a whole kind of section asking to list the estimate of number of crowns. We also ask around, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but just
Okay.
what do you do for lab work, right? Do you have an in-house Theric machine? Some of the practices we've dealt with have a full-blown lab, right? They've just, instead of going to a third party, that can be a good fact pattern. What are some of the other technology you're using in your practice? That sort of thing. So those are the types of questions that are outlined in the questionnaire.
Okay, and you had mentioned CADCAM and all that stuff, that's going to give us a better chance, because then you're designing a crown. You are the one that's making changes and playing with the margins and occlusion and all that kind of stuff. So that, CAD/CAM machine doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the credit, but certainly gives you a better shot at it, right?
Exactly. Yep, that's what we find.
So Heidi, we did, and I want to go back to our client that we took care of. So this was a large prosthodontic practice, and they were kind of the exception rather than the rule. And like we mentioned earlier, this is no joke. We got them over a 4-year period, about $400,000 in tax credits. So why don't you talk a little bit about this case and what was unique about it, and maybe this might elicit some thoughts from our listeners. Say, oh, well, I do that.
Yeah, sure. This was a large practice of 3 dentists, and a lot of patients come to them for restorative care from some sort of trauma or some sort of situation that created a problem with their mouth. So this group had an in-house lab with several assistants. They had a lot of employees. I want to say a couple dozen. And so we were able to analyze what they do. And what they were doing is they would take in a client, do x-rays, do some sort of, testing, consultation, all that. Then they would collaborate. The dentist would go back and talk in a team with their hygienists and their assistants and their lab techs and say, okay, this is what we see. What types of devices, what types of, materials and things are we going to be putting together in order to achieve the result? And that's that iterative process that we've been talking about through this whole entire podcast. Is there has to be some sort of identification of, well, could we try this? We're uncertain that if we try that, we'll get the result that we want. So they were really involved in the design process using their CAD/CAM machine and different materials, the layering of multiple materials, different adhesives, combining multiple attachment systems, a lot of that, including your, crowns and bridges and things like that. But very unique practice in the sense that they do a lot of complex cases. So that was the one that you're referring to, that we were actually able to get federal and state credits north of $450,000 for them over a 4-year period of time.
Yeah, and it was really fun sending those tax returns out. Say, oh, here comes your first one. This is about $90,000. It was really fun. So now, Heidi, you might have. I think you have another case study of maybe a smaller general practice where you might have been able to get a doctor some credits. If I remember our conversation.
Yeah, and this is what we see a lot is, you've got 2 dentists, a handful of hygienists and chairsides, and they purchased some, that CAD/CAM machine or, mill and printing crowns and bridges in-house. And so this particular practice did about 300 crowns and 300 bridges a year. And so we analyzed their time, looked at it and thought, okay, what are we going to include? And we were able to actually calculate about, for federal and state, just for 1 year, about 30 grand.
30,000.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now here's the cool thing about this, guys. This is not just a one-time deal. I mean, we can get this credit every year. Is that correct? Until they change the law?
Yeah, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. So this is like I have a friend of mine. He's my golfing buddy, and he's a labor attorney. And he's got a couple of clients that just every week when we go out golfing, he'll tell me this story and that story. And I said to him, I said, so now, counselor, this. I have a new word for you. It's called annuity. Well, this is an annuity to you guys, doctors out there. This could be, assuming that you are practicing and as long as you're doing the same types of practice, this could be an annuity to you. Now, so Heidi and Joe, I want to ask you this. So the idea is it has to be innovative and new procedures. So if a doctor is continuing to do what they're doing year in and year out, can we claim year in and year out new procedures? How do you look from one year to the next to the next to the next? And do you get to the point where you say, well, okay, you've done all your new procedures and you're not qualified anymore, or does that ever happen?
It certainly can happen, but we can also look at it, year in, year out. And one thing we talked about earlier is, well, first off, couple thoughts. For most of whether it's a dentist or a manufacturing company or whatever, if you're kind of in that mode of innovation, you never stop innovating, right? There's always a different type of technique or material. We typically see this kind of process of continuous improvement. But the other angle here is what we talked about earlier of every case is unique, right? Every patient's needs are a little bit unique. So if you're kind of your practice is coming up with some of those unique solutions, what you did this year, you can't just cut and paste and do the exact same thing next year for a different patient or a different scenario. So there's really a couple again, not to guarantee you're going to take it every year, but it's not unusual to see a dental practice that's able to claim this credit year in and year out.
So let's talk about what the dentist can do to plan in their documentation as to how they can get this credit. In other words, a dentist says, I've been to all these courses, I've changed the way I'm doing things, but obviously I don't know how the credit works. What kind of documentation should a dentist who's listening to this podcast kind of be writing down? Should they be taking notes like, okay, this is how I did procedure A and now I'm doing it this way, or what can we give some pearls here as far as what they should be thinking about? Obviously, if you have any concept that you might qualify for this credit, fill out the questionnaire and we'll take a look at it. But what kind of documentation or any changes maybe they could make in their practice that might make them better qualified for this credit?
I'll take a shot at this one. So really, we're not probably asking you to do a whole bunch of extra work, but you've already got records of the procedures that you're doing and the different case files, that sort of thing. So there's really two types of things that we would like to see probably better documented. One would be, to Art's point, if you're trying out a new type of procedure, a new technique, a new material, just jot that down in the file, right? That, hey, we're trying this new procedure, or hey, if there's something unique about a particular case of, hey, we need to do an implant, but this is not a cut and dry procedure, right? We have to do a bone graft or something, and not sure the best way to do this. Those sorts of kind of thought process types of things would be helpful to have documented. And then so that's more on the activity side. From a costing standpoint, most of the dentists we talk to have a pretty good idea of, hey, if I'm involved in designing and creating a crown, that's going to be 1.5 hours of dentist time or whatever. So it's good to, if you don't have kind of a good handle on how much time certain procedures are taking you, it would be good to start to track that and be able to. That way, if we identify, hey, this group of procedures and things you're working on qualifies, we kind of have a blueprint for computing the qualified wage expenses that Heidi talked about earlier.
I mean, you might even consider, in looking at your professional continuing education doctors, is, you're going to take the courses that you need to take. You're going to take your Dental Practices Act courses, and you're going to take whatever's required. But you might consider looking at courses that involve new and innovative procedures. So, Joe and Heidi, what if we start doing sleep apnea procedures? Dentists make mouthpieces for people who I are one. I have sleep apnea. I happen to sleep with a CPAP machine, but you can put in a device. Would that be considered a new procedure in an office? Something like that, maybe?
Yeah. So, sorry, I've been hogging the mic, so I was going to see if Heidi wanted to jump in there, but
go ahead.
And again,
she's an Arizona State fan. Don't worry about it.
Hey, now.
You hear me, the reason I'm waffling a little bit, because every procedure is going to be a little bit unique, right? So,
right.
But yeah, that would certainly be on the list of things we would want, because if there's a design of a device and a scan that needs to be made, and something that's the kind of unique is built for that particular patient or that case, that would be kind of on the list of things to consider.
And then doctors that use lasers. I had one doctor who told me that he can do what's called a gingerectomy in about a minute and a half and charge, $120 for it. I mean, that's a new procedure. So anything that you're doing, anything that our listeners are doing, Joe and Heidi, that's new, improved, requires a different modality than what they've been doing before, this could do it. And $15,000-$20,000 is $15,000 to $20,000. That could fund folks. That could fund maybe a third of your retirement plan. That could give you some extra money in your pocket during some of these difficult times that we have and stuff. So this is real. This is something that you should all be looking at, and just get creative. Use your, the great thing about dentists, Joe and Heidi, is that they are, we have a lot of entrepreneurial doctors, but they're very creative. You go into dentistry because you want to create, you want to be innovative, you want to make a beautiful restoration or change lives and stuff. And there's just a lot of things that I think that they do. The more and more I've been talking to you guys that might qualify. But again, not for everybody. I want to be real clear. We might come back to you and say, nah, not feeling the love here. But you've looked at these and you've done a lot of these. And this is real money and real credits. And right. So, anyway, so we're about at the time we're going to wrap this up. So let me get to both of you some final thoughts, maybe some, one or two pieces of advice to the doctors as to what they should be doing. And we'll give out the information one more time on the questionnaire. But, any final thoughts from you guys?
I guess I'll start. As we talk through some of the things that could qualify, I would say just while it's fresh, jot down what your thoughts, your areas, your practice is involved with that could potentially qualify. That way, when you get the questionnaire and fill it out, you'll be able to document that for us and figure out if there's a way to benefit. And again, Art said it a couple times. It certainly doesn't benefit every dentist, but it's probably worth 10 or 15 minutes of your time to figure out, hey, is this worth going after? Because it can be a real tax savings.
Yeah, and I echo what Joe says too, as far as, the IRS really does look at the process of experimentation, just a fancy way of saying what different alternatives are you looking at. So if you can identify one or more, again, jot them down. That's very important. But that process of experimentation is really important to be able to show the IRS that you're trying different things.
Well, I tell you what, you guys have really brought this to a level that if you can bring it to a level that I understand, that's always a good thing, because I'm not one of the brightest.
Oh, you're USC grad.
Well, there you go. There was a thing that was out there, Heidi. It was called the USC Athletic Department Entrance Exam, and I lost it. I can't find it, but I remember the first page of it. You open the first page. Now, again, we have a lot of clients who are SC clients. I'm a huge SC fan. I apologize. I'm probably going to lose half my practice from this right now, and I'm going to get some nasty emails from my SC people. But I am a huge SC fan. But this could be any college. I actually saw one that was also Florida, I think it was. So page one, it was a picture of a mouse and a picture of an elephant. It said, circle the one that's bigger. So, they pick on the athletes all the time. Anyway, listen, you guys have done a great job of laying this out for our listeners. Really appreciate it very much. One more time, give out your contact information, and I'll give out the website, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
So the best way to reach me is my email, jjstoddard, STODDARD @eidebailey.com.
And you can reach me at my email of hlanin, that's HLANIN, @eidebailey.com.
And again, if you would like to participate, and I mean, there's no cost to you, we'll take a look at this for free to see if you qualify. Go to our website at www.eidebailey, that's EIDEBAILL.com/dental-RD. You will find the questionnaire. Fill out the questionnaire with whatever information they're asking for. Obviously, everything that you send to us is confidential. And just push the send button, and we'll Heidi and Joe and their team will take a look at it. And one way or another, you'll get back to them, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, guys, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I mean, this is a this is one of the great things about our firm that we do, and the fact that we have this capability of doing this and helping hopefully lots of dentists run up the federal deficit, as I said earlier, is a pleasure. Let me give you my information one more time. My phone number in Southern California, 657-279-3243, or artwiederman@gmail.com. Look on Decision in Dentistry's website, www.decisionsindentistry.com. Again, fantastic clinical content, fantastic continuing education courses, cutting edge stuff. I look at it every month, and there's always great new articles. Go to our website, www.eidebailey.com. We have a dental page that's bringing all the newest updates. I write some of it. Some of the other folks write some of it. I know that I think Joe and Heidi, didn't you guys put an article out on our webpage recently or on this?
Yeah, we did.
So there's something there. And then again, if you're looking for a dental specific CPA anywhere in the U.S., www.adcpa.org is where you want to go. Go to the members link and look up the state, and there they are. There we are. So anyway, Heidi Lanin, Joe Stoddard, great information. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time today to talk, and hopefully we can get some dentists, save some dentists some money, maybe in time for a holiday. It's been a very, very challenging year for all of us. This might be a nice little something, pay for some holiday presents or something, we hope. So thanks a lot for your help, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Art.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and that's it, ladies and gentlemen, for this edition of the Art of Dental Finance and Management. Please tell your friends about our podcast. Send them the link. If you just tell them they can go on to Apple or their Android, and they go to their podcast app and just put in Art of Dental Finance and Management, and you'll find it. You can subscribe to the podcast every week. Listen to it. We've got a lot of great guests. As I mentioned, we are now in the 90s as far as how many episodes we've done. I am working on a very big surprise episode for episode number 100, and I do not have it confirmed yet, but if I do, I will let you know in advance so you can listen. And like I say, that's please tell your friends, and remember my 5-word adage for 2020. Failure is not an option. Work on your practice. Work with a consultant. Have empathy towards your patients. We're all in this together. We are all going to get through this. And God bless every single one of you. And thank you so much. And bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast is produced by Eide Bailey in partnership with Art Wiederman, CPA, Decisions in Dentistry Magazine, and the Academy of Dental CPAs. For audience questions and feedback, email Art Wiederman, awiederman@eidebailey.com. That's AWIEDERMAN @EIDEBAILLY.com. Or you may call Art at 657-279-3243.